Thank you. And welcome to this webinar on how to leverage the power of AI in Treasury. I'm Marielle Barkley, the editor of this award-winning Global Treasury Leaders Program, which is organized by The Economist Impact and sponsored by Deutsche Bank. The program's objective is to share thought leadership and to connect treasurers around the world. And we do this through a series of activities every year, which include summits in different regions, webinars like this one you are attending today, an online community where these events are hosted. The community is open to corporates only, and this allows treasurers from all over the world to connect and exchange ideas on any topic of their interest. It is totally free, and I am now going to send you a link via the chat facility so that you can join if you would like to. Just remember to choose the Global Treasury Leaders Network when asked what groups you would like to join. Feel free to join as many as you like, but it's important that you remember Global Treasury Leaders Network. But going back to today's webinar, the idea is to make this session as interactive as possible. So please ask as many questions as you would like using the questions tab, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And please send them to us as soon as you think of them. Otherwise, you will forget. So don't wait until the end, and we will bring them when appropriate. So without further ado, please let me introduce this webinar's chair, Patrick Kunz, who is the Managing Director at Pecunia Treasury and Finance, which is a company that provides interim treasury management services. Patrick has ample treasury experience, and in particular regarding treasury technology. So with that, Patrick, it's over to you.
Thank you, Marielle, and thank you for having me moderate this session. I think this is an excellent topic where a lot of treasurers are excited to hear about. Let me quickly introduce you to our audience, to our speakers. Gladys for Microsoft. Gladys is Senior Director of Global Treasury and Financial Services at Microsoft. Next to Gladys, we have James Kelly, Senior Vice President, Treasury, Risk Management and Insurance at Pearson. And we have Jean-Baptiste Didet for Treasury Technology Director at GTI. All experts and users of AI technology and software who can definitely talk a lot about the use cases of AI in Treasury. And I'll ask them a lot of questions about use cases. So let's make this as practical as possible. We try to split up the webinar in different sections to structure it in a way that we talk about certain AIs in section 1, 2, and 3 that are specific to cash flow forecasting, large language models, and other tools. We'll talk about the future a little bit and other use cases, risk and threats. And there is at the end at least 10 minutes to 15 minutes for audience questions. But as Marielle said, ask them when you have the questions. I will see them in the chat, and if appropriate, I will ask them immediately. But let's start with the webinar immediately. James, can I start with you? Let's start with the basics on AI. Machine learning, cash flow forecasting. That's the most use cases we've seen so far. You have bought an off-the-shelf software to start your AI journey on cash flow forecasting and further build that on internally. Can you tell us what you've done to automate and what AI helps you in your cash flow forecasting journey?
Sure. So I think the biggest single thing that we've effectively used it for is to allow us to deal with the complexity of building a cash forecast across multiple currencies, multiple jurisdictions, multiple cash pools, and be able to slice and dice data in a kind of systematic and logical way between lots of categories, so that we're able to identify quickly the differences between actual and forecast. And we've built it with AI in mind, because effectively an AI cash forecast is system generated, therefore it can be difficult to interrogate exactly what was included in the forecast. So the more you can break it down into small logical pieces, the easier it is to be able to say, okay, well, it's clearly assumed that we're going to receive 3/4 of the value of that invoice for that major customer, because you can identify that's the amount that we got outstanding, and it's therefore, you know, the amount coming in is on that date, and it's then assuming a subsequent amount a little bit later, or whatever it happens to be. So you can back solve for what the AI has done by effectively forcing it to show its workings. That means that we're able to leverage a process that effectively starts with the what's different as the kind of the objective. So we build out a base forecast and then go to our operating companies and say, tell us why it's wrong, rather than the old model, which was build us a forecast and then explain to us what you put into it. And when you've got lots and lots of stakeholders, that can be quite challenging, because different people have different risk appetites. So, you know, some will be really bullish on what they're expecting on receipts, and some will be more pessimistic. And so if you're sitting in the center, firstly, it becomes a big admin exercise to try and collate all this information. And then secondly, trying to kind of validate it and set a sensible benchmark to kind of say, okay, well, are we going to be like super bullish, or are we going to be conservative, or are we going to, you know, just unpicking what everyone's done, you almost run out of time to have the meaningful conversation about what's different in the business that you should be picking up, what are the new trends, etc. So by leveraging the kind of forecasting capability, which is, you know, it's relatively rudimentary, it's effectively based on time series data, so it's not leveraging, you know, trends from internet pings, or you know, at this stage we haven't got any massively sophisticated machine learning coming in. You know, this is relatively rudimentary. Take what's happened before, roll it forward, and then, you know, apply what are the forecasts that we've got coming in from a P&L perspective to kind of uprate those or whatever. And then we go through and go, okay, right, tell us why it's wrong. And then, you know, the machine learning element is to kind of say, okay, well, like, how far out was it before, and so what does that mean going forward? But I think where we're trying to get to is bringing in a little bit more, like, now that we've got everything broken down into categories, like, actually our divisions match up quite closely to the way that our bank accounts are set up. So it's relatively easy for us to start getting a little bit more sophisticated, saying, okay, well, this business, which is D2C, you know, like, effectively we're going to collect as soon as we bill the sales. So let's have a look at, you know, what are the trends that actually impact there. So that's where it gets interesting. But there's lots of applications within Treasury that we're going to first before we get to that bit. So I'll talk about that a bit later on.
No, you're right. Makes sense, James. You start with step 0, step 1, start with the basics, and then you advance it. But you probably have more than anybody else. So thanks for sharing. Jean-Baptiste, to you. You've built something similar, machine learning, AI for cash flow forecasting. You haven't bought off the shelf, but you built it internally. So can you tell the audience how you approached it? It must have been very different because you built it internally. And also a little bit, what made you decide to do it internally and not buy off the shelf?
So thank you. Yes, so we have also a tool to do a forecast based on statistical models, and the here the idea is to forecast our 12 months cash forecast FX exposure rather than the short-term liquidity. So maybe precision is less. We actually started developing it with a third party, then it was brought in-house. later on, simply because our company built on building teams that were capable of dealing with this kind of modeling. So we have a dedicated team in-house that is capable of building that kind of model based on statistical machine learning AI tools. So since you can do it internally, it will be more tailored and will match more precisely our needs. So now maybe just a different approach than James on this one, and I think it's up to each companies really. First, a few considerations because before we go in that kind of journey, it is that the first, the data needs to be very clean. So when we were building the model, obviously the data cleanup was one of the questions and one of the activities, because it's otherwise it's garbage in, garbage out. And conceptually as well, the accountability is very important. So here, the idea was to actually push the model or the proposal. So every month, our entities are submitting this forecast. So it can be centrally hedged on our FX hedging program. It does consume a lot of efforts in our entities. So the idea was to reduce these efforts and at the same time make the forecast more accurate. And machines are more able to deal with a lot of data compared to human, and the usage of the AI proved that it was often more accurate than the manual submissions. However, the model is still a tool for the entities to be used or not. Because if it's built centrally, then accountability can be questioned. So the model is also based on historical data, and only the subsidiaries or the markets know how or what could be a material change in the key parameters that would affect the forecast. And yeah, and to be honest, it's not used by all the entities. It's still a process. There is a lengthy process to also make them more comfortable with the tool. So it has pros and cons versus a central generated model. But at the end of the day, we have a very tailored solution that we build in-house and that can be used by the entities to really make their forecast more accurate.
Which is eventually the goal, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all about data, clear. Gladys, over to you. Microsoft, one of the biggest companies of the world, probably lots of data, lots of entities. In our preparation, you mentioned you also use machine learning AI, not necessarily for your cash, but also mainly for your FX and determining your non-USD exposure. Yeah, probably the same approach, slightly than Jean-Baptiste, or the same goal Jean-Baptiste and James have to predict the future. Given the size of your company, can you tell the audience, how do you approach it? How do you start a project? How do you roll it out? How do you make sure your entities adopt it? What are the challenges? Help us out.
Yes, yeah, we have been using the machine learning in cash flow forecast and hedging for a few years. It's very complicated, right? We have 200 plus subsidiaries, and how to get the clean data, as John mentioned, is very critical, because the complexity and volume of the data is super challenging for us to figure out, hey, where the data is, where is the best data we use for the machine learning model, and also how we can classify the data into different clusters to get the more accurate results, as James mentioned as well. So the ideas brought up, hey, how we can figure out the better model to predict more accurate results, but without all the manual inputs from all the 200 plus subsidiary financial controllers. In Microsoft, we have a highly centralized treasury operation function, right? So even the local subsidiary has certain control over their bank accounts, but the movements of the funds is actually highly centralized in the headquarters. So it gives us more flexibility. Hey, we can tell how we use the model, and then how we move the funds around the globe. It's not an easy project, I have to say, since you have to coordinate with so many people and to get alignment and to get buy-in from people. But from the results we see, after we deploy the machine learning model into the forecasting, it did significantly improve the accuracy and also reduce our foreign exchange exposure impact to our P&L. And we also use this forecast to benchmark to our collection vendors, right? Thinking about, hey, we have our outsourced vendors to collect billions of cash for us every month. And on that one side, we say, hey, here's our forecast of cash we should receive, and here's actual results of the vendors. So we say, hey, here's a benchmark you should achieve to collect the cash for us, and we are going to measure how you perform from that. So that's another interesting use case versus just normally, hey, how you measure your forecast your cash balance in your bank accounts, also do the hedging program. It requires a lot of project management coordination with different people. But I would say at the end, the buy-in from everyone with the same vision, same outcome is super critical. So everyone understand why we need to do this, and when they see the benefit, they're on board, right? Of course, we still have to do a lot of refinement over the time, considering, hey, when you have a big acquisition, like the activation, like the nuance, we have to digest the new data sets to adjust our cash flow model to ensure we have included all the different data sources and results. And if there are any business changes over time, say like the huge investment now we have on the data center, on the AI stuff, that creates new different type of cash out to the business. So we also have to consider all the changes over the business so we can have a better results from the forecast.
Very interesting. Good to hear that cash is still king. Okay, let's move to the next section. Let's talk about large language models, the GPTs. Less directly Treasury related, but definitely in AI that could be used within Treasury and is used within Treasury. I want to start with you again, Gladys. Microsoft is one of the owners of a big large language models tool. Obviously, you are using one. Can you tell the audience how you are using it?
Sure, yeah, I'm super excited about this topic. This is my favorite topic recently. So after the launch of ChatGPT in November last year, Microsoft also announced our Copilot in February this year, right? So after that, our internal finance team also spent a lot of time to generate ideas of use cases within ourselves. So after the exercise, we kind of bucket our use case in 4 categories. Summarize information, generate content, recommend actions, and simplify tasks. So I'm going to share a few examples, but not just limited to Treasury functions. So as finance leaders, you can bring these examples back to your company to share with your colleagues and potentially generate more ideas for your own. For example, summarize information and generate content. If you have used the ChatGPT on the public version, it may be pretty familiar already. Like as an individual, I use a Copilot to summarize a long email for myself, right? So it takes seconds versus I have to read the whole email for 5-10 minutes to get what people are trying to say. In Microsoft, you can imagine people try to reply to all the emails. I may receive an email already back and forth with 20 people. So instead of reading through the bottom to the up, I asked the ChatGPT, say, hey, summarize, and I got 3-4 bullet points. I don't have to waste time to read all the email. And also I use the Copilot to summarize from the team meetings, right? If I have a team meetings, I can now join on time, or I could not join at all due to the conflict. I use Copilot to summarize the meeting notes and action plans and owners. So it saves me time to listen to the recording after that. I can get it in maybe just less than 1 minute versus I have to listen to the recording for 30 minutes. It saves a lot of time for me. It really increase the productivity. And on top of that, I can ask Copilot to translate conversation into English if it's in another language. So that helps a lot as well. Using that as individual, I also use Copilot to compose email sometimes, right? So if I want to draft the email, I want to make it more polished, I can ask Copilot, draft this email with these key bullet points. That's, I guess, everyone may use already. And I also use that to generate documents or even create PowerPoint presentation. As everyone may have known, so if you want to present something to your leadership, create the PowerPoint presentation takes time, right? So now I can give the Copilot a few bullet points. Hey, generate the PowerPoint presentation for me. It takes maybe seconds to give me 5-6 slides. I can start to work as first draft and continue to modify. But broader than that, as the company or organization, we do identify many use cases in this type of activity. For example, our investor relationship team, they use Copilot team to summarize earnings script and identify significant trends and highlights. Our procurement team, they use Copilot to flag important terms in contracts like payment, pricing, discounts, so they can compare the different vendor contracts or even the RFP from the different vendors. All right, and my team, we use the Copilot to draft the monthly financial close review deck and write the analytical comments from the information we have for month-end closing. So it may take 2 days for us to do that before, and now take maybe 2 hours to complete all the work. It's a lot of use case there. So these are maybe use cases people know already. On top of 2FTE, we adopted these features to our outsourced vendors as well, right? Since in Microsoft, our team also managed the collection activity. We have about 700, 800 vendors just doing the collection activity for us. So these collectors now, they use the summarized information, they use the draft email to communicate with customers to chase for payments. And they also use the Copilot function to summarize the collection costs with customer, right? In the past, after they have 20 minutes cost, it may take them another 5 to 10 minutes to just take down the notes and say, hey, here's actions I need to follow up. Here's the date I need to follow up. But now they use Copilot to summarize it in 1 minute. So that saves a lot of energy from the vendors as well. So we can improve the operation efficiency, also potentially reduce the cost of these vendors, right? If you have 40% productivity improvement, I do not need to pay the full amount to the vendor to do all the activities. So another few cases that we can talk about, hey, how we use GAI or Copilot to recommend actions and also to simplify the tasks, right? My team, we use the Copilot in Excel to identify the financial close variances from previous months and recommend, hey, here are the areas maybe we need to take another look and do more analysis. And our sales team, they use a Copilot to recommend the best solution to customers for the contract renewal or per the historical transaction data from the customer. And we also have our operation team. They use the Copilot to review the contracts and orders from the customer, so which we eliminate all the manual review and also reduce the human errors during that process significantly. And our tax team, they use a GAI to identify, hey, what is the potential compliance obligation in different regions so we can mitigate our tax risk. So these are just a few examples about how the GAI and the Copilot can help have a lot of productivity improvement in the organization. I will pause here. I know I talked a lot, but I'm super excited about this topic. I can talk it for 2 days without stopping.
It sounds impressive. I can understand why you're so enthusiastic. It's a game changer and especially a time changer. So thanks for sharing all these stories. Jean-Baptiste, you're using Copilot, but you're also using a GPT yourself. in a proof of concept way to also do some really cool inside your company. Can you share more about it?
Sure. So first, I would like to share indeed with Gladys, how can I say, the appreciation of the Microsoft Copilot. So we were one of the lucky corporates to actually test it since a few months now. And it is indeed a game changer. It's becoming now normal to have at the end of each meeting your minutes and your action points already off the shelves. It is fantastic. Same for drafting emails and Word. Obviously, you need to come back to it, but still, it helps a lot. You don't start from a blank page. It's actually very fantastic, even to brainstorm on any topics. You ask, you reiterate, and it does bring some insights, such as a normal GPT approach. So yes, it's a fantastic tool. I cannot wait. The Power BI Copilot to generate automatically dashboards based on data sets that would be on simple wording queries. So which is obviously now we approached actually the large language models since sometimes already. And we also had internally, we built a sandbox to use GPT in a safer way. So we had a team here, innovation team that built that sandbox so we can play with it. And for Treasury, one of the interesting use cases that we started to build were obviously to manage documentation on our banks, so to be able to query through this documentation, because we do have a lot, sometimes in different languages. So it's quite a powerful tool, because then you can query, and it does not look up for a word, but it does understand, and it will extract the clauses that you're looking for based on its understanding, which is super powerful. But I think we could also extend it to some other activities. This is more forward-looking, but you can think of training materials or procedure inquiry bots. And this is what this tool can bring. Basically, it turns data into, well, text into data, and this is fantastic. I mean, obviously, it will take some time before we reach out all the number of possibilities to this one.
Sounds very cool, Jean-Baptiste. James, hearing this, a lot of opportunities. We hear all the success stories and how great it is. But we're hearing it from two big corporates who have budgets, who have manpower. But how about getting there? You've been there a couple of years ago with nothing, and then deciding which tools do I look at? What is my budget? Who's going to implement this? Where do we start? Help the audience out.
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to Gladys and Jean-Baptiste. It's one of those things. I'm feeling like I'm an outsider at the moment, looking into Hamleys at Christmas and going, this is going to be really exciting. I've been super excited to hear some of the stuff that I've been watching the Microsoft videos on what Copilot is going to do. At the moment, we are in a world where we are able to use ChatGPT on an wholly anonymous basis. So I use it to generate reports and things, but everything has to be, it goes into ChatGPT on the we're an education company. It goes in as if I'm a tire manufacturer, and all my policies are designed around the Treasury for a tire manufacturer. So that it can't be traced back. So, we're based in Basingstoke, not in London, lots of fakery so that it's not easy to track things back. But it's one of those things, I mean, our entry point has been using external vendors. And as we've kind of gained knowledge and gained understanding, we've been able to bring a bit more in-house. So I now have a data expert who's part of the team, who's amazing, who primarily we use Python and use the sort of AI tools around Python. And so we're kind of, old school. We're building out our database and building out tools primarily to address a lot of the gaps that Copilot is starting to successfully fill. It is the I need to search the company structure, for example. So we've got an interactive company structure diagram that you key in your company name, and it gives you a PDF of this is where it sits in the company structure. There it is, ready to send off to the bank. All of these things that are kind of like, they're time consuming. Previously it was a case of write to company secretary, they send something back to you, and then you send it off. You've wasted half an hour between all the emails and everything else. So we're kind of building it up in lots of little bits, kind of going through the experience, particularly using third-party vendor was really helpful, just in terms of like helping us to understand the stuff that we didn't know. We knew that there was going to be lots of things that we wouldn't have a clue on, but it's quite difficult if you're kind of starting completely cold to know exactly where those will be. So it's really helpful to be able to effectively stand on the shoulders of others who've been there before, and then also to kind of we were iterating some new pieces. At that point we didn't want to connect to our ERP system, so we were looking at how do we find other ways of getting the data, how do we pull things in from bank statements, all that kind of stuff. So kind of going through that process, and we worked in a really agile way, which was both really engaging, but it's also it meant that we learned as we went along, and that methodology then stood us in good stead as we looked at other projects.
Cool, thanks, James. How about RPA? We haven't talked about RPA yet. Jean-Baptiste, are you using it?
We actually have a few cases. We actually have a few cases in production, so mostly around the bank statement to increase the automation for reconciliation. It's mostly locally deployed with the help of a specialized team as well for the automation RPA in our GBSs, Global Shared Service Centers. And this is mostly the main usage of RPA that we have currently, yes.
Okay, interesting. How about you, Gladys? Do you use RPA? And who has built it? Do you have specialists internally who know this and who you can off the shelf ask, hey, I have some processes, might look at automation?
Yeah, we do use RPA in those type of repetitive rule-based tasks, right, which will mimic the human interaction with apps. We do not have in-house. If we need to build any RPA, we hire a vendor to do the work. So for example, hey, we need to process massive amount of payment applications to customers' invoice, similar to Sean mentioned in the collection space. We use RPA to help to do that in SAP. But now I see Microsoft people internally, we use Power Automate more often. So which is the very low entrant bar tool, right? Which the people without too much tech background, you have access to this tool and you can design your workflow, and then you can build your workflow to help you to automate the workflow with involved data integration, notification, approval. So that's why I see a lot of teams actually using Power Automate more often than the RPA now.
An interesting answer, because would it mean that in the future or near future we would see more tools coming out which are more accessible to everybody, that we don't need these tech specialists anymore?
I think we're moving past RPA. If you think about something like, if I use Copilot as an example, a lot of what it's doing is it's accessing your database of emails, your database of Word documents, your database, and then connecting that data. So a lot of what RPA is used for is effectively forcing interfaces. For example, we use it to take reports out of our Treasury system into our database because the Treasury system isn't set up for APIs. So, if you look at something, once you're in that kind of, going to sound like everyone's obsessed with Microsoft, but if you use the kind of the Microsoft environment, so you've got things in your Word documents, you've got things in your Excel documents, you've got things in your email, all of that is accessible to something like Copilot. So you can either build it through Copilot or you can use Power Automate. So a lot of these things become much more accessible, and even the things that aren't massively accessible, say my data guy I was speaking to an hour ago, we're using UiPath because for some reason we don't have a Power Automate premium license, but he's done all the free videos, and he was saying, I think I can do most things that I need to, but I might just have to pay for the odd bit of training if there's something else that I need to do. So it's one of those things that I think there's a lot to be said for having a bit of a can-do attitude and seeing how you get on.
I like it, and probably the training is cheaper than the license, right?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point, huh? Jean-Baptiste, you're Treasury Technology Manager Director. So technology is your thing, but that's in a big company. Would you say that every Treasury team needs a Treasury system tech savvy tech guy, like James calls him?
I would say if you can, yes. Meaning we are already quite advanced in terms of system setup. We have one single SAP instance. It's our TMS. We are very comfortable already on our system landscape, really advanced. But where to go next, right? We still need to look for innovation. We know lastly there is a lot of focus on Treasury. As soon as the risks and the environment is getting more and more turbulent, everybody's looking at Treasury, and everybody is now worried that we control all those risks. So through technology, through innovation, we can always do better. So yes, one of my activities is really to make sure we can still look for innovation. And with all these new technologies being blockchain, AI, machine learning, there's a lot to look at, right? So I think if you can afford it, it's always good to have a look into what's coming. Obviously, there is a big weight to understand, okay, what can I do now at cost of being a front runner and do myself, versus wait a bit that it becomes a more standardized approach. And for sure, the main key elements will become mainstream soon. So this is always a trade-off, but looking at the technologies and what's coming, and also match it versus your the vision that you have on your system roadmap is, I believe, key. And AI can bring a lot in terms of automation and to the entire corporate, actually, and finance a lot, specifically, as we mentioned.
Yeah. James, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I think there's a couple of things that are playing into it, particularly at the moment. So the first is with rising interest rates, you're now in a situation where there genuinely is a difference between good and bad cash management performance. And so it's easier to demonstrate the ROI. The second piece is that with the strengthening of the dollar and the impact that's had on some less well capitalized currencies and the number of currency restrictions that are coming in, that's meant that, again, it's you've got a lot more risk of loss of capital through currency devaluation, and B, you've also got a lot more complexity to deal with in terms of currency regulation. And so that, to my mind, plays to investing more in processes and data to understand and better be able to manage those risks. And so, I mean, effectively in our case, we had a vacancy come up, and I decided that rather than having a third dealer, that I would have 2 dealers and a system specialist, because what we were finding was that getting the dealers to say, okay, right, we want you to work on system improvements when you're not working on other things, that it was too time consuming. And also, actually, some of this stuff, although it's reasonably accessible, it's still quite technical. And so actually, like, what I found is that there's a huge difference by being able to put someone in who is much more comfortable in the environment, whether it's talking to our tech teams, whether it's working out how things connect, whether it's picking up new systems and tools, than if I'd done the same and said to my dealing team, right, you know, I want you to try and build this. I think the reality is I'd still be here in 5 years' time, and you know, we probably wouldn't have got to where we've got to already.
Well, good points, but it's a balance between money, team, and even more specialized knowledge.
Yeah.
Gladys, how do you deal with that? You have a bigger Treasury team, you have a techie culture, but you have the engineers who have the technical knowledge, but in the end, Treasury who needs to apply it. Did you hire Treasury specialists who already had tech knowledge, or did you use your internal engineers to help them get to a certain tech knowledge in internal education? Because Treasury specialists are already scarce on the market. Now make it a Treasury technology specialist. They are even rarer.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We talked a lot internally as well, hey, how we should think about talents for the future in finance and also in Treasury. In our side, in the past few years, actually, we see the best AI or technology ideas generated from the Treasury people, right? So they know the day-to-day work. They know where the opportunity come from. So these people are really the people to tell you, hey, here's our business needs. This is the vision outcome. I expect technology can help me, right? So that's the value I see these Treasury experts can provide a value in the whole technology innovation cycle. At the same time, we also leverage our engineering team to help us to do or develop some of the solutions, since we need to leverage technical skills we don't have in our own Treasury team. Say, hey, here's our business ask, here's the ROI, and how you can help us as technology folks to help us to deliver the solution for Microsoft. And in this process, we join the best knowledge from both sides and to deliver the optimized solution for Microsoft. But similar to James mentioned, when we think about the talents in the future, maybe we are trying to think about, hey, should we hire more people with data science knowledge? So when we deploy the machine learning, when we think about how we can potentially customize the Copilot functions to deliver more solutions for Treasury team, we may need people with this tech knowledge so we can do more with less people. At another side, we are providing training to our internal people. Hey, our CFO always says growth mindset, right? We need growth mindset from our internal people. Say, hey, here's a change. You're going to see a lot of change in the future, in the next 10 years. It is time now. We need to embrace the AI era, right? Everyone in our team, we are asking them to take the AI trainings. We ask them to take a badge, so you certify that you get the trainings done, to upskill ourselves so that we will not be left behind the train of the AI. So these are all the things we're trying to do to ensure we have the talents prepared in the future.
Very good, very good. Good to hear. to the audience listening in, we have less than 15 minutes left. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We can see them and we can ask them to the panelists. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. Now let's look a little bit into the future, guys. Let's look 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ahead. What will the world of Treasury AI technology look like? Jean-Baptiste, let's start with you.
The field of possibilities is enormous, right? So actually, we have a team of talent people actually looking at the potential applications of AI within the Treasury, and it's across the board. I mean, we can obviously think about the analytics, cash forecasting. That's what we mentioned, but we have more specific already use cases that we would like to think about. So it can improve fraud detection, sanction screening, even media monitoring on third-party main stakeholders of the company and our department. We can think about co-pilots being also having a transactional aspect, meaning that it reads the email and proposes you a few actions and will potentially post automatically in our SAP a transaction based on the emails. We have actually also, even for insurance, statistics on claims and so on. I mean, the field of possibilities is enormous, and I think Gladys mentioned a few categories, areas where it can be classified, but at the end of the day, can be applied almost everywhere. So the difficulty is really to understand where are the quick wins, obviously, and again, where do you want to be a front runner, or where do you want to wait maybe a more global solutions from fintechs or the big players.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gladys, do we still need treasurers in 10 years?
Yes, we will. Actually, I think Treasury
Hopefully.
people, Treasury people actually, from my perspective, will playing an even more crucial role in the future, right? Thinking about treasurer, we are the key strategic partner to the CFO, right? You manage the cash flow of the company, which is the critical piece of the whole end-to-end cycle for the business. And we are going to be the strategic partner. We will be there for the decision making. Of course, maybe with assistance from AI, right? So AI can recommend the decision, but we are the one to make the final decision, right? So that's why I'm always joking, hey, why Microsoft name our product as Copilot? Because the human or the treasury people is still the pilot. You only use Copilot to help you to eliminate the unnecessary repetitive work you need to do, but you are the center of the AI, right? So that, I think that's the concept I heard in one of the training. AI, this idea of AI is still human at the center, right? All the technology around us is actually to serve people, right? So we can have more value add, we can be more creative, we will have bandwidth to have more connection with other human beings. AI is only a tool to facilitate us to do more without the low end stuff.
Yeah, interesting. There's a question from the audience. Where are you getting the AI training and certification from? Is it in-house or external?
Actually, if you go into LinkedIn, there are a lot of trainings available on LinkedIn. I also know there are also a lot of training on GitHub as well, right? For the developer or more technical people. But on LinkedIn, there are so much different trainings for people even without any technology background.
Okay, thanks. James, we haven't heard you about the future. Where do you see it go in 10 years?
I think I'm not sure. It could go one way. You know, the reality is, I think if we go 5 years, we're all still going to be signing off paper interest rate swap confirmations and paper account opening things, and you know, because the length of time it will take the banks to adopt this stuff is forever. We know that at some point there'll be a recession and they'll go, oh, maybe we don't need all these lovely people to like fill in paper forms, and maybe we will go automated. So probably within 10 years, that side of things will be done. I mean, I think the reality is that there is already a trend in Treasury where a lot of treasurers are treasurers plus something else. You know, I'm Treasury plus risk, for example. You know, a lot of treasurers are Treasury plus ESG. I think the reality is that a lot of finance teams are relatively lean and will continue to be. I think the reality is that you probably would be reasonably ballsy as a large company to turn around and say, actually, we're not going to have anybody who's got any treasury experience. But it's possible. You know, the reality is that there's bags and bags of material around, you know, what does optimum capital structure look like? Sorry, our lights keep going out, so I have to keep moving. What does optimal capital structure look like? You know, you can get a bank in to come and tell you, you know, what type of bond should you issue or whatever it happens to be. But again, you know, the reality is that the role of the treasurer to a large extent is becoming increasingly technological anyway, because you're plugging together cash pools and interfaces and all of those other things. And the reality is, if you look at it from that perspective, then there's always going to be someone doing that kind of role to make sure that it all actually knits together.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. A treasurer without technology and a treasurer even without data, it's nobody yet. Somebody standing, where's my information? Without information, you cannot drive the car, you cannot steer the company. I fully agree. Let's talk a little bit about risks, because we're hearing only the nice stories. There's also an audience question about data privacy, if it's a risk. But let's make it slightly bigger, that question. The threats of AI, Gladys. All these concerns, are AI taking over? Because are they becoming too advanced? Do you have policies internally how to work with AI, the usage and the management of it? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, it's a very valid question. And as for Microsoft, actually, our company has outlined the 6 principles of responsible AI from day one, right? Since that's, I remember even when the Copilot announced, we have talked about the responsible AI already, right? So what the 6 principles we have is, say, like accountability, inclusiveness, reliability and safety, fairness, transparency, and privacy and security, right? So all these key principles we adopt in day-to-day management of Microsoft, including how we develop our product, also how we use AI internally. So we do not violate any of the like privacy, security of customers' data. We need to provide their data when we train our model to ensure we use them properly, right? And we also have established a governance structure to ensure all the progress and accountability. And we have rules to standardize this responsible AI requirements. So a lot of work is done internally for Microsoft to ensure we have the responsible AI.
Okay, very good to hear. Let's look at it from the corporate side then. Jean-Baptiste, we have crooks, villains, hackers, all trying to steal our money. We have phishing, we have CEO fraud, and they also learn about these tools. Deep fakes, we can already mimic voice, we can mimic faces of rappers, maybe even CEOs in the future. How do treasurers need to deal with that? And how are you looking at it?
All, I mean, the risk before everything, a new technologies, in my opinion, should be looked as a risk, because some people would obviously invest very much into these technologies very quickly to maybe not for the good reasons. So AI is, in my opinion, one of these tools that will make the phishing tailored to some people's data that these hackers would have gathered. Obviously, the deepfakes as well, the impersonating one of our colleagues or management people. You receive a call, and you will really have your a colleague asking you something, even to collect information and data, but it's not your colleague. And I think this is the first area where we need to be cautious, where we have our security teams, cyber security teams, to be beefed up, because it's before it becomes an opportunity. I think it can be also a threat to any corporates, and especially for treasuries, treasurers, where we deal with sensitive information. We must be on top of any other functions, be aware about more advanced phishing or any kind of new techniques hacking that can arise from that.
No, can fully agree. We have 2 minutes left. James, your final thoughts on the risks?
They're huge. And to Jean-Baptiste's point, we have a data classification scale, and I broke our scale. It's a 1 to 5 scale. I put in, here's all the data I've got. It came out with 6. I didn't know that was the thing. Anyway, it's one of those things. We are prime targets, and the reality is that what we're seeing, actually, we run a professional testing business, and people are moving back to, we want to do a test in person with someone walking around the room so that we can be sure that that's who we're dealing with. And I think to an extent, that's one of the things that we're looking at. How do we make sure that our treasury team is together a substantial amount of the time, and certainly our leadership are normally in our building. And so it's one of those things that actually that then means you don't have to worry about whether the chat message that you've got or the WhatsApp or whatever is really genuinely your CFO. You can go over and say, hello, did you just send me a message, because it looked like you, but I wasn't expecting this. And I think we are going to have to go back to old school tools to an extent. Are we going to be sending each other faxes across the channel just because it's a technology no one's using? So it's get a bit creative. But yeah, no, it's all manageable, but it definitely means that you've got to be a bit more creative than you would have done otherwise.
Yeah, thanks, James. We're at the end of the session. At least we're out of time. I have the impression we could talk for another hour at least. Thanks, guys, for your insights, your examples. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has learned a lot as well. So thanks for your input again. Marielle, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. I would like to thank you in particular for chairing this session, and the speakers for sharing their experience and best practice. It's a really compelling topic. I would also like to thank Deutsche Bank for making this event possible, and finally to thank the audience for being here. I hope you found the session helpful. Please feel free to continue this conversation with the speakers and colleagues at the Global Treasury Leaders community. You can join using the link I shared with you earlier on the chat. And through that platform, you can exchange experiences, ask questions to all the members, and we share content on a regular basis. So we'll put that link again in the chat. Our next webinar will be on payments fraud. We will be sharing information shortly. It will be at the first week in February, so please watch out for our emails. I hope to see you all then. In the meantime, have a lovely holiday season, and thank you very much, all of you, for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.